Alert viewers will already have worked out that the by-election I fought last June in the Batley and Spen constituency, obtaining 22% of the vote, bringing the entire British and even international press corps to a place never before visited by so many political hacks and completely forgotten because I didn't win the by-election. You'll have noticed its geopolitical closeness to the Wakefield constituency. It could not be more close. It is literally next door. And there's a parliamentary by-election there imminent. It's imminent because of the conviction for serious sexual offences of the then Conservative Member of Parliament. He had the grace, at least, upon conviction, to promptly resign his seat in Parliament, unlike others who prolong the agony by appeals and appeals and appeals and delays. At least he did that, and he's given the people of Wakefield the chance to choose a new Member of Parliament. The Conservatives will start at a serious disadvantage, because when your own Member of Parliament commits offences like that, there's bound to be a penalty to pay by the next Conservative candidate seeking people's support. You would have thought that the constituencies was Keir Starmer's Labour Party's to lose, but they are managing to lose it. They have broken their own rules and foisted upon the constituency Labour Party an outsider candidate whose principal qualification is that he worked for the former Labour Member of Parliament, Mary Creech, the hammer of Jeremy Corbyn, the tormentor-in-chief of Jeremy Corbyn, who slandered him at every possible opportunity and is now a commander of the British Empire. That can happen when you do the bidding of the British Empire. Her former staffer has been foisted upon the local people by Keir Starmer's Labour leadership. In so doing, they broke their own rules, never mind the campaign pledges that Keir Starmer made when he was running to succeed the aforementioned Jeremy Corbyn. Starmer promised that from now on, local people must choose the Labour candidate in elections and in by-elections. That one got ripped up with the rest of the 10 pledges that Keir Starmer made in that leadership election. But not only have they broken the pledges, they've broken the rules. And they have ensured that local councillors, like the Deputy Labour Council leader, have been pushed off the shortlist, and therefore they are unable to be the candidate in the by-election. The proximate reason in the last case I just cited there was that the gentleman in question had once liked a tweet by yours truly and had stood up for Jeremy Corbyn. On both those grounds, he was effectively disqualified. The entire Labour Party local executive resigned en masse in protest. And today, just 20% of the members turned out to vote for the man who's been given the gig. 20%. He's a perennial loser. He sought the Labour nomination against me in Bradford West in 2012. He sought the nomination in the Loughborough constituency. He's a serial loser, and I predict he's going to lose Wakefield for Labour too, and so he should. Just 20% of the members wanted him as their candidate. The 80% are presumably interested in an alternative candidate. And the best situation by far would be for a local candidate to emerge from within their ranks to challenge the fake Labour candidate who Keir Starmer has foisted on them. If that does not happen, then someone in the nearby vicinity with a track record of bridging all kinds of divisions within society, racial divisions, religious divisions, class divisions, political divisions, Brexit, Remain divisions, should be called forth to stand as an independent candidate. Better still, a Liberty Alliance candidate, starting on a platform of protecting those liberties that we have not yet lost and demanding the return of the liberties that we have lost. That would be the second best outcome. The third best outcome is one that I will not rule out. And that is that I pack my bags and head back to West Yorkshire and put my own hat in the ring. One way or another, Keir Starmer has to be defeated. Keir Starmer must go. He's leading the Labour Party and therefore the Labour movement to destruction. And he is betraying the British people, whose democracy dictates that we must have an effective opposition party at Westminster. So watch this space in Wakefield. The entire world was watching the funeral in Jerusalem this week of the joint American-Palestinian citizen Shireen Abu Akleh, an acclaimed Arab broadcaster of the first rank, a household name, a household face throughout the hundreds of millions of Arab homes. From Marrakesh to Bahrain, people watched and listened to Shireen describe the long crucifixion of the Palestinian people. How many decades have gone by since the Nakba? The Nakba, the catastrophe which saw Palestine wiped off the map. Hundreds of thousands of its people driven from their homes, never to return. And the long agony, the suffering of the people who remained, their children and their children, and now also their children. Generation after generation of the people of occupied Palestine have suffered repression on a scale that many people have never seen in their lifetimes before. There have been bigger tragedies, there have been bigger disasters, but none as existential as this. It was Palestine that was wiped off the map. It was the Palestinians who were driven into the sea. And adding insult to injury, those Palestinians are called the terrorists, the victims are called the terrorists, and the terrorists are called the victims. At least so far as official Western propagandists and politicians are concerned. Keir Starmer was very clear when he said upon his election as Labour leader that he supported Israel without qualification. He was not alone in that. The United States supports Israel without qualification. But how much longer can that last? Because here we saw a Christian American citizen, a journalist, a broadcaster, cruelly murdered, then slandered on her slaying, slandered after they slayed her, blaming Palestinians for her murder, when the entire world's media absolutely knows that she was shot in the face by the Israel occupation force. But that was not the end of the story. Just when people were reeling from this wanton, cruel murder, came her funeral. She was a Christian woman, a Roman Catholic woman. And when her coffin was being carried out of the French hospital in Jerusalem, did you see it, President Macron? Did you? Out of the French hospital in Jerusalem, it was attacked viciously by scores of heavily armed Israeli security forces. The coffin had a big cross on its lid and the Palestinian flag, the flag of her nationality, a nationality recognized throughout the world, the nationality that signed the Oslo agreements 30 years ago. That flag was ripped from the casket, and then the pallbearers were viciously attacked by tear gas and heavy wooden clubs. And I want to say to those pallbearers who came under that ferocious attack and who could feel and see Shireen's coffin beginning to slip from their grasp, rocking, shaking, her body inside, thudding against the sides of the coffin, who could not imagine the horror in which they were being enveloped. Those pallbearers stood tall. The coffin rocked, it tilted, it slid, but the coffin never fell to the ground. The pallbearers ensured that the coffin never fell to the ground. They held her up, as throughout the Arab world, the name of Shireen Abu Akleh will be held up forevermore. She joins the pantheon of martyrs as one of the brightest stars to emerge from the benighted Holy Land. Those who never let Shireen fall, we must hold up in our own eyes and in our own hearts. The cruelty of the Israeli occupiers surprised me not a whit, but the stupidity of them, on the other hand, that's something different. Because I predict from you that as Shireen's coffin nearly fell, so did the scales from the eyes of millions of people around the world who could suddenly see that which others amongst us have been able to see throughout our lives. Those of us who said that it was the Palestinians who were the victims, not the terrorists, could see what we meant when we said that. Will the world now fall out of this most peculiar love affair with the state of Israel, described now officially by the United Nations as an apartheid state? Will the world change its attitude to the perpetrators of the murder and the desecration, and its attitude towards the victims of never-ending murder, desecration, and repression amongst the Palestinian people? We'll be talking to important witnesses about that. I only have time for a couple of more issues in this monologue. Imran Khan announced in Sialkot this week, in a doom-laden, emotional address, which brought distress to hundreds of millions of people around the world, that he had become aware of a clear and present threat to his life, a conspiracy to murder him, as so many Pakistani leaders have been murdered before. His security has been withdrawn. The usurpers, the front page of the Police Gazette, the federal cabinet, 60% of whose members are wanted criminals on bail, on serious charges, have withdrawn his security. And Imran Khan says foreign powers have determined that he must die, as the only way to stop the torrent of tens of millions of Pakistanis on the roads in the great cities of Pakistan and headed for Islamabad to overthrow the imported government of usurpers and criminals. The last resort has apparently been reached for by these criminals. The last resort being the murder of Imran Khan, the legitimate prime minister of a country of 220 million people, geostrategically placed next to India, next to Afghanistan, next to Iran, next to China, and with a fleet of nuclear weapons at its disposal, may be about to be plunged into ungovernable violence with entirely unpredictable consequences. So, if you're listening to me, as Donald Trump used to, in Washington, D.C., call this murder off. For if you carry it out, absolutely no one, and certainly including yourselves, can have even the remotest idea of what the final outcome will be. Revolution in Pakistan, which takes her out of your orbit forever and into the orbit of your enemies forever, is the very least of the consequences that you will face. Lastly, throughout the 1980s, I spent some of the best years of my life in the Philippines, assisting the 1st of May Union, the KMU, which struggled valiantly to remove the dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos, the American puppet president of the Philippines. I gave a lot of sweat, no blood, but a lot of sweat in that cause. And now, his son has just been elected president in a landslide. And Imelda Marcos, with her 4,000 pairs of shoes, is back in the presidential palace, aged 94, still buying shoes. We'll be talking about what could possibly have given rise to this rebirth of the power of the Marcoses in the Philippines.